We extend our warm welcome this morning to our guest organist, Reagan Durant. You probably remember her. She lives in a strange place called North Carolina.
Where we don't even have a winter.
But hurricanes. I was in Cape Fear. I know all about it. You remember Karen? Quick, board up those boats. Get the heck out of here. But anyway, so good to have her with us today. Have you ever had the courage to open the door to a teenager's room? Laughing. I sense that you do. And so you push, you shove with all your might, right? You make your way in, you stand there utterly dumbfounded. You think to yourself, this takes a mess to a whole new love. And of course, we beat and berate and cajole and we threaten, clean up this room or else. And oftentimes I have found, and parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, we can compare notes. I find threats work for a while, right? But it never exactly creates that spark that brings that inner transformation. When I first came to St. Mark, I had pretty much a full head of hair. And then I was in charge of about 25, 26 teenagers. And I remember one time we would go to the National Gathering in Lansing. And in this hotel, there would be 1,500 kids. All those hormones just flowing back and forth. It was absolute insanity. It was sheer bedlam. And there was a group of guys, I won't say their names, but Mark Gerchek and Frank Andre and all their ilk, there they were, and they'd always get in this one room, and I would always say, guys, let's keep it clean. Let's keep it clean. And I'd try to encourage them, threaten them, the whole bit. Of course, one of the things they would first do when they got there is that they would order a pizza. And by the fourth day, when it was time to leave, the remnants of that pizza had turned from a pizza into a science experiment. This is what these guys did. And you wonder what happened to me. This is definitely part of it. I mean, and now I'm going far afield here, but I still remember going to the National Gathering in San Antonio, running frantic through the airport in Atlanta, looking for Frank Andre and also Mark Godwin. And because they were about ready to close the door, and they were not on the plane. And of course, you know, Vernita said would have served him right, but that's the way they go. Anyway, my point this morning is, when it comes to telling people what they should do, my experience has been, and I sense that most of you would resonate with this, that telling people what to do doesn't seem to work all that well. And so I remember again the words of the great poet Oberle, who said, "You cannot tell people what to do. You can only tell them parables." And I don't know much about the great poet Oberle, but I certainly think he must have had kids. It's the only reason I think he came up with that. This morning, I think you see again that the beauty and the sheer genius of a story, a parable in particular, is that when they are first told, they seem, I think we would agree, they seem pretty cute and harmless, easily dismissed with maybe a forced smile, a shrug of the shoulders, and then we walk on our way oblivious sometimes to the fact that a really good story has the ability to invade you. Certain elements of a story, images painted with words or a statement, perhaps a certain character in that story, continue to work in the subterranean depths below the level of conscious awareness where you are essentially incapable of defending yourself. The parable was the most formidable tool in Jesus' hands. Oftentimes, parables left the learned and the righteous scratching their heads and tugging their beards, but it seemed to open the door for common, ordinary folk, just like me and just like you. In fact, it is amazing to think that in this day and age, that in our biblically illiterate day, as I mentioned in the newsletter, the fastest growing group in the United States, in fact, in the Western world, is not Mormons, it's not Lutherans, it's not Catholics, it's nuns. And I don't mean sweet ladies in cute habits with rulers. I mean nuns. They have no connection, experience with any particular church or community of faith. And in spite of that undeniable and sad fact, there are many people who, to this very day, have at least heard of the prodigal son. And they have heard of the Good Samaritan. In fact, there are people who use those terms all the time and who never go to church. Of course, I am aware of the fact that there are a lot of people who may not be all that clear on what prodigal means, or that in the story, actually, it's the father who is the true prodigal in the most gracious sense. They may be completely clueless as to what it was that brought the Jews and the Samaritans to bump heads and to have such ill will toward each other. But even in spite of that fact, people know the basic outline of the story, and even if they can't articulate the meaning of it, they know that the parable of the prodigal son has something to do with the power of forgiveness, and they know that the story of the Good Samaritan has something to do with compassion as a bold verb. Of all the parables that Jesus ever spun, between 38 and 40, take your pick, the prodigal son and today the Good Samaritan have often been referred to as the gospel within the gospel. Stories of God's surprising, shocking, offensive, liberating love that for us made clear in the life of Jesus himself. And there are good reasons why they continue to challenge and inspire. So this morning, here is this poor, hapless guy, and a foolish guy. That is often not made mention of, because to acknowledge the fact that the Jericho Road and traveling all by yourself down the Jericho Road was a pretty foolish thing to do. I'd say stupid, but people don't like that when I say that. But a foolish thing to do. And the fact that he got beaten up isn't all that much of a surprise. It's kind of like people who build their home near the ocean or a great lake, and then when the water comes and touches their home, they can't believe that it actually happened. Yes, this is most certainly true. Foolish. And there he is, beaten and left naked, stripped of his money and his dignity. And imagine yourself on the side of the road, all those stones stabbing the fleshy parts of your back. Your left eye is swollen shut, and your upper lip is the size of a sausage. And to add insult to injury, here come two religious people who we know will definitely save the day. But it turns out that they have more important things to do than to stop. So a third man appears on the horizon, and whatever inclination this broken, beaten man would have at this point to hope is kept in check by the fact that the last two times it didn't go so well. This individual on the road is a Samaritan. We struggle to find words today that would give the same level of offense. It would be like a progressive suddenly being told a story about a guy named Mitch McConnell who came to actually help him, or vice versa. A Samaritan, by the way, who doesn't behave in the same way as the previous two. This man, the Samaritan, doesn't practice his faith in the same way as Jews. He doesn't worship in the right way. He doesn't worship in the proper place. Even Jesus acknowledges that. But the difference is that he sees. He sees this pathetic figure crumpled on the side of the road like an abandoned wreck in Michigan with an orange sticker on its windshield. And he doesn't look away, and he doesn't try to find a way to circumvent and maneuver around him. Jesus said his heart went out to him. His heart went out to him. And the Samaritan actually didn't just wait for feelings then to develop, but his hands and his feet followed the lead of his heart, and he went to that man and he knelt down beside him and he began to care for him. I think of the simple words of the great Paul Tillich, who said, "There is no love that does not eventually become help." The Samaritan with the bad theology does the right thing by loving a stranger. He deals with this crisis, this interruption in his day, not by cursing his luck or the stars or blaming God, but by doing everything in that moment in his power to give a man a chance to recover and to live again. I know myself personally at this point, standing on the cusp of 60 years. I don't have too many secrets from myself. I confess too often, even though I wear holy robes and say holy words. There have been times in my life when I followed the lead of the priest and the Levi. I can tell you many times in my life I have cursed interruptions, failing to realize in that moment that God was actually calling me. That I failed in certain moments to entertain the angel that God sent my way. Failing sometimes to exercise compassion and to grow in the image of Christ. I confess too often that my heart has been deeply moved by something. Now listen carefully to this. See if you recognize yourself in this. How often it is that I have been moved by something. A story that someone told me, a situation of someone standing in front of me, something that I see on television. And I confuse that momentary feeling, that feeling, with actually having done something about it. Many people here, and especially my friends, know that Pastor Oberle on occasion says, "Stop emoting! Stop emoting! Do something. Don't just feel." There's too much feeling today. Too much feeling. And not enough doing. But I can also tell you, and my wife also knows, there have been times in my life when I have acted. There are times when, if I told you some of the places I've been, you would say you're a crazy man. There are times when I have literally risked my own personal safety to kneel down. There have been times when I have literally, not figuratively, literally turned my back and became vulnerable, not because I'm this great guy, but because from the time I was a little kid, my parents would take me to Holy Cross Lutheran Church, and I would sit on the floor cross-legged in Azen Hall, which is a fancy term for the basement. And they would tell me stories about the prodigal son and the good Samaritan. And I repeatedly through the years heard Jesus tell a story about a merciful, loving, compassionate outsider. The very same Jesus who was himself a merciful outsider, who did go and who did do and acted, and has become the neighbor to everyone in the world. I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that ultimately you cannot tell people what to do. You cannot ultimately force people to do the right thing. But what you can do, you can tell them a really good story.